Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Principles and Policies of Low and Moderate Income Solar. And this is part 3, Financing Options for Low and Moderate Income Solar. This webinar is presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as CESA, as part of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar in Your Community Challenge. My name is Diana Chase. I'm a program associate here at CESA, and I will be moderating this webinar. In just a moment, I'll pass it over to our presenter for this webinar, Ben Paulos of Paulos Analysis. But first, I'd like to go over some background information. Today's webinar is the third in a series of 8 individual presentations. In this presentation, you'll hear about financing options for low and moderate income solar projects. To watch webinar recordings or to sign up for the next session of webinar presentations, you can visit the web address you see on your screen. These webinars are free and available to the public. They are particularly geared toward participants in the Solar in Your Community Challenge. For those of you participating in the Solar in Your Community Challenge, I wanted to let you know about an important resource we're offering, virtual office hours. All of our instructors for this webinar series will be available for one-on-one consultations. To learn more about this, or to schedule a consultation, please email me, Diana Chase, at the email address you see on your screen. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for today's webinar, Ben Paulos. Ben is the principal at Paulos Analysis and a CESA board member. He's an independent consultant and writer based in Berkeley, California. He provides consulting services on energy policy, technology, and trends to nonprofits, government agencies, foundations, and corporations, and is a regular contributor to Green Tech Media, Power Magazine, and other publications. Ben will speak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then he'll take some questions. Ben?
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, I'll be talking about finance options for low-income solar. I tend to gloss over the moderate income market because it's not really clear that moderate income customers are having difficulty going solar, whereas low income has a number of issues that we're going to talk about today. With the finance options, the objectives of our session today, first is to understand some of the difficulties involved in financing low-income solar projects. And second, to learn about some of the solutions that are being implemented or being proposed to work around some of those difficulties. First, we should talk about the market. There are about 130 million housing units in the U.S. About more than half of those are above 2 times the federal poverty level. Federal poverty level is a nationwide single number for income that is used in some programs to determine eligibility for low-income support. If you can see my moving arrow here, the blue boxes are the ones that are above 2 times the poverty level. They're generally never considered low income. The ones under the blue lines are, in some programs, it depends on the program and the definition. There's slightly more renters than owners that are considered low income. If you get all the way down to the federal poverty, 100% of the federal poverty level, there are quite a few more renters than owners. So of the 30 million homes that are under 150% of the federal poverty level, that number, 150%, is the number generally used for eligibility for the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, which is the largest national program for energy assistance. So considering that level, there are about 30 million homes, slightly more renters than owners, as I mentioned, more in the south than in other regions, and more in cities, central city and suburbs, than in rural areas, although still quite a large number in rural areas. So that's the universe of low-income households that we're talking about. When it comes to bringing solar to them, there are a number of difficulties that get in the way of finance and of marketing. First of all, the solar can save money for a low-income household in many states. Solar is a cost-effective option, and it's in an increasing number of states. It has reached grid parity at retail rates. And no one needs to save money more than a low-income household. However, they don't have the money in their savings to simply buy a solar system very often. The workaround to that is to have a no money down deal to finance it. However, low-income people are often considered a credit risk, so a lot of lenders are not willing to lend to them or require high interest rates when they do. A lot of vendors, third-party solar installers that offer these no money down deals tend to shy away from low-income households because of that perceived risk. The second problem is that many low-income people, as we've just talked about, don't own their homes. They're tenants or they live in multifamily housing. And the workaround there is to allow off-site solar through community solar, for example, and virtual net metering. However, those policies are still rare. They're not available in a lot of states. And in some states where they are available, they aren't really structured to be that beneficial. So community solar is still really an emerging policy that could benefit multifamily housing, but so far has not in many states. And a third conundrum, if you will, is that especially for the policymaker perspective, every policymaker has a limited budget, and they can either, they traditionally try to seek leverage with their limited budget. They try to offer a 30% incentive, for example, to elicit a 70% investment on the part of the customer, like the federal tax credit does. And that can reach a lot of people. It can leverage a lot of other people's money. On the other hand, with low-income customers, it can be difficult to leverage the assets of a low-income person because they don't have many assets. So in some programs, they simply give away or they fully subsidize solar systems. And that reduces risk for sure and increases the savings for those households, but it also reaches very few households. Seeking leverage can put more risk on the customer. It can also, expecting too much leverage and not getting it can also result in a program that simply doesn't work, where you don't offer enough incentive because you're not finding enough leverage. So the idea of low-income solar, I've discovered, has triggered a large debate. It's not really as straightforward as you hear sometimes. Not everyone agrees that solar is a good idea for low-income households. They are concerned that there's too much risk involved, that low-income households have a hard enough time, paying their bills and maintaining a roof over their head, and adding more debt to that can increase their debt burden. If it's secured, especially if the debt is secured by the home. If you have a homeowner who is getting a PACE loan, for example, or PACE finance, or a home equity line of credit, those are secured by the home, not by the person's income. So if they default on their payments, they can lose their home. The alternative there is to have unsecured debt, where it's not secured by their home, like a credit card. However, if you have poor credit, unsecured debt can be very expensive. The interest rate is higher based on your credit score. Another workaround there is to have a third-party vendor like SolarCity or someone. However, as I mentioned, they tend to avoid risky customers altogether because of that perceived risk of non-payment. Some advocates of low-income solar argue that we need to make it easier to loan to finance for low-income households, that credit scores should not be used. We should instead seek out alternative measures for underwriting, like their bill payment history on their utility bill. Some marketers who are active with low-income customers have found that there haven't been that many defaults. Defaults are a fairly low level, and the risk of a poor credit score is really overblown. Others would argue that the loan should always be based on an ability to repay. That's under, there's a federal law, the Truth in Lending Act, that requires that ability to repay, and that was really strengthened after the housing meltdown of 2008. So this is a very active debate. I think the best solution is that some states have policies that reduce the risk for low-income households and for lenders, and they also reduce the cost of borrowing by providing loan guarantees or credit enhancement. So having an active state policy to to reduce this problem is really the best way. So I'm going to talk about just a few solutions. There are many solutions that are being tried and are being proposed. They are documented in this report, which I wrote with the Clean Energy States Alliance, CESA, called Bringing the Benefits of Solar to Low-Income Customers. It's available on the CESA.org website, along with lots of other good information. That report discusses all of these options at some length. And there are many options for finance. So I refer you to that for more information. But really just categorizing them, there are a number of approaches that are intended to preserve the value of solar, such as net metering and rate design that is encouraging for behind-the-meter solar. These are critical for all customers, but they are especially critical for low-income solar because some of the rate designs can be quite punitive for low-income households or quite beneficial. The second category is to lower the cost of installations by cutting soft costs such as customer acquisition and permitting through programs like a Solarize campaign. Providing rebates. There are still some states that provide rebates for low-income households. Bulk procurement can be a good way to lower costs, where you're buying, recruiting 100 customers at a time. We're working up the supply chain to coordinate procurement. And also simply getting donations from foundations or corporations or others. A third category is to reduce the risk of finance. Reducing the risk means reducing the cost because it reduces the low interest, reduces the interest rate for the loans. So states and local government can offer low interest or no interest loans for low-income solar. They can offer guarantees for developers. On-bill finance, that is on the utility bill, can be a good way to finance solar or energy efficiency for homes. That way the savings, the cost and the savings for the measures are on the same bill. And what the customer sees is a reduction in their bill, which makes it easier to pay rather than two separate bills. Another category, especially for renters, community solar is really the most prominent tool for reaching renters and tenants of multifamily housing. That very much requires virtual net metering, where the value of the output of the community solar project is credited to the bill of the customer. And that can happen independently of the meter and the electricity flows. It's really a financial transaction. As I mentioned, that's not common in many states, so you'll need to find if it's available in yours. And lastly, the world of affordable housing has a lot of its own incentives and supportive policies. HUD, the Federal Office of Housing and Urban Development, has a large affordable housing suite of programs that can offer finance to housing for low-income customers. There are a lot of tax credits like the low-income housing tax credit, the new markets tax credit, and more. A lot of banks have obligations to support affordable housing. So there's a rich suite of options in the world of affordable housing that can be applied to solar where it makes financial sense. As I mentioned, CESA has much more information about all of these ideas, not only in the report I mentioned, but also there's a directory of state programs. There are a number of individual reports and fact sheets about specific aspects like solar loan programs. A good source for finding out about the conditions in your state is another service called the Database of State Incentives for Renewable Energy, or DESIRE. That's at Desire USA. It's essentially an encyclopedia of every state policy on energy efficiency and renewable energy. And lastly, Solar Market Pathways, which is another DOE Sunshot supported initiative that is supporting 14 projects around the country, including some that are relevant to low-income and multifamily housing, as well as a lot of analytical tools that have been created for those programs, where you can calculate financial issues and engineering issues, technical issues. So a lot of really good materials there. So that's what I wanted to cover in the short amount of time. I welcome questions from the audience now.
Thank you, Ben. Our first question is, given the difficulties and the risks of financing, is solar even a good idea for low-income households? Shouldn't we just be encouraging energy efficiency and weatherization instead?
Yeah, energy efficiency can definitely save money. It's been proven many times and over many years. And it is also very cost effective in almost every case, especially with new lighting technologies coming along. The savings are continuing. And as solar power becomes cost effective, it can also create savings. The one benefit of solar over energy efficiency is that energy efficiency can easily save a household, 20–30% of their energy expenses. Solar can provide much deeper savings. It can eliminate an electric bill, for example, in most parts of the year, especially if this low-income household is not paying for the solar system, if it's provided through an energy assistance program, for example. Solar can also create very long-term lasting benefits to the household. Solar systems will work for 30 years with little to no maintenance. And that's not always true with energy efficiency measures, which can essentially wear out or fail at some point. So I think it's a good idea for low-income households if you can make it low cost and low risk. I think that's really the key for energy policy in this area, is to make it low cost and low risk as possible for low-income households, and then it can provide big benefits.
Thank you. We received a question about on-bill tariffs. The question is, do on-bill tariffs have potential to reach low-income customers?
An on-bill tariff meaning like a value of solar tariff?
I'm afraid it wasn't specified. I didn't know if that term might be more familiar to you than it was to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely there are on-bill finance or on-bill repayment. That's another. It has different names if that's what we're talking about. Those are ways to where the utility makes the electric bill available as a way to collect repayment of measures that the customer buys. So, for example, a customer gets solar on their home. The utility either finances it themselves, lends the homeowner the money to go solar, or lets a third party like a bank collect from the customer via the utility's bill. It can be very convenient for the customer, and the idea is that it reduces their risk of non-payment because the customer continues to pay a single bill, the utility bill, and that the bill is lower than it was before because of the measure. So not all utilities offer it. It's not required in every state, but it has been shown to be a fairly effective way to finance efficiency and efficiency in solar measures where it has been tried. I'd refer you to some interesting reports from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab about financing energy efficiency for low-income households. There's a lot of discussion about on-bill finance and pay-as-you-save and PACE financing and other measures.
Thank you, Ben. Another question, can energy assistance programs be used for solar?
Right, so energy assistance programs are, the two major national ones are LIHEAP, which I mentioned, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, and WAP, the Weatherization Assistance Program. LIHEAP is much bigger. The budget is much bigger. However, states have some discretion about using LIHEAP funds on weatherization. LIHEAP is intended to be a bill assistance, a payment assistance program. Weatherization is intended to weatherize a home to implement energy efficiency measures that provide long-term savings. So states have the discretion about how to implement and how to allocate their funds. They can also add their own funds in addition to the federal funds. So Colorado was the first state to use WAP funds, weatherization funds, for a low-income solar project. And in order to do that, they had to request permission from the Department of Energy, which allocates the WAP funds. But they got the permission and they've gone ahead with it. Now other states are also trying it. I think I heard Minnesota is authorizing some LIHEAP and WAP funds for solar projects. One important part is that with the WAP program, there are very strict formulas for determining what is a cost-effective measure. So if a measure doesn't pencil out, it really can't be used for WAP funding. But as I said, as solar gets cheap enough, it is starting to pencil out. If the price can be, if it can be delivered at a low enough price. Another important thing to remember about these programs is that there are cold weather and hot weather states that have a different emphasis. Cold weather states, the emphasis is really on heating bills, insulation and windows and so on, furnaces. So solar PV is not always very attractive in a cold weather state. In a hot weather state like Arizona, New Mexico, air conditioning bills are the main problem for low-income households. So PV is much more attractive because it reduces summertime demand. So it'll vary, your state administrator's attitude might vary according to the weather and according to demand, of course, because the programs are always underfunded relative to demand. So it can be difficult to convince them to use money for larger investments like solar that create longer term benefits when that results in fewer households being served altogether.
Okay. Thank you, Ben, for your excellent presentation. And thank you to everyone who attended this webinar and participated in our Q&A. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to every question that was submitted. If you have follow-up questions, or if you'd like to schedule a consultation as part of our virtual office hours, please email me at diana@cleanegroup.org. We hope you'll check out the other 7 presentations in this webinar series. For more information about this webinar series, you can visit the web address on your screen. This web page includes links to webinar recordings, as well as links to register for our upcoming November 17th webinar. We hope to see you there.